started with a 911 call from 24-year-old Shannon Gilbert, an escort who was at a house on Long Island.
Please, what are you going to do to me? What are you going to do to me? Stop it! Please, get around.
These people are plotting to kill me.
After that call, Shannon went missing. And when investigators began to search for Shannon, they discovered much more. 4 victims on Gilgo Beach, all working as escorts. Then 6 more bodies, some of them dismembered, found close by on the same stretch of beach. Then a year after the first victim was found, Shannon Gilbert's body was finally recovered. The investigation for the killer was a search for a serial killer. But that investigation was delayed and obstructed by corruption in the police force, by the chief himself, who had his own legal issues connected to escorts. Then in 2023, a new task force was put together and the case was solved within months.
Heuermann is a demon that walks among us. If not for the members of this task force, he would still be on the streets today.
Tonight, we are live from the courthouse in Suffolk County, New York, as the accused murderer makes an appearance in court. We have all the details as our in-depth coverage of the Long Island serial killer case continues. I'm Vinny Politan. Thank you so much for joining us tonight here on Closing Arguments. And make no mistake, the arrest of the accused Long Island serial killer was big. It was important. It was significant. Think about everything that happened before that. 13 years of not knowing, not being able to solve a case. On the one hand, the public. You've got a serial killer out there. Where is he? Who is he? Is he striking again? How many more victims are there because it took 13 years? But now he's in custody. Big, big moment for all the victims' families, for law enforcement, for the community at large, to have him in cuffs behind bars, charged in this case. But that's just step one. Those of you who watch the show, watch the network, you understand this process. They always say the wheels of justice turn slowly. Well, for 13 years, they were going really slow trying to solve the case. Things will pick up a little bit in this process, but not necessarily a lot. It's a complicated case. There are multiple victims. The defense looks like they are contesting it at this point, and they usually do at this point. If you get to trial, it could be, a year, could be 2, could be 3, could be 4, could be 5 years down the road. You just don't know. You just don't know. But a case like this, my gut is telling me, is not going to get to trial quickly. Now, let's talk about the victims. You've got the 4. He's been connected, charged with 3, implicated in another. But there are the other victims as well. Is that a continuing investigation? Are they attempting to connect that to this accused killer? Are they trying to exclude him? Are they looking at other unsolved cases in the area around the country? Are there more charges coming forward against this defendant? We don't know. We don't know. I know investigators are working hard trying to figure it all out, but at this point, we don't know. And remember, just on that, you're talking about 11 victims on that stretch of beach, 4 of them sort of clustered together, the Gilgo 4. Those are the ones that they've tied him to so far. And they seem to have some strong evidence, DNA evidence as well. Now, the other question, when you're talking about a serial killer case, that's what we're talking about here, is will he talk? Will he talk? Is this someone who will take credit for what happened, much like BTK did, and then bathe in it and have those moments where you can speak and you can brag and just bloat your ego for what you did? Or will he pull a Bundy, go to trial? Bundy, I think, represented himself in one of the trials. But then after he's convicted, then he spoke and tried to, again, blow up the ego and take credit for other murders. So that's still out there. Will he talk? And if so, will he at some point admit to these murders, and will he be admitting to any other murders? I mean, there could be cases from 30 years ago, potentially. We'll see. These are all unanswered questions because, as I said, this is just step one in the case. Everybody was in court. The DA came out of court today and addressed the public briefly to talk about it. Let's take a look.
We just had our first court conference subsequent to the arraignment in New York State. We have a very extensive discovery statute, which we are endeavoring to comply with the work of both the court and defense counsel. This is a 13-year case, so as you saw, we have a great deal of information, evidence, photographs, reports to provide to the defense counsel. We've begun that process. I think it was 8 gigabytes of material, which is a tremendous amount. And that's just the beginning. We're going to continue to do that on a rolling basis. And, this case, the charges in the indictment are just allegations. So this is the first step in the process of proving those allegations. So we look forward to undertaking that process. We've spoken to the victims. The victims are not going to be making any, they've elected not to make any statements at this to the media at this time. They want to maintain their privacy. They are obviously interested in the case, but they're not going to be speaking to the media. So that's about it.
Let's bring in Court TV crime and justice correspondent Matt Johnson, joining us live tonight outside the courthouse in Suffolk County, Long Island, New York, inside the courtroom today. Matt, great to see you tonight. Tell us about today's hearing.
Well, Vinny, it was just wall-to-wall media. They filled the parking lot here, on the sidewalk here in front of the Suffolk County Courthouse. Media was just on top of each other, trying to get the shots of these prosecutors walking inside, as the suspected serial killer was back in court for the first time since pleading not guilty to those murder charges last month. And inside, up there on the 4th floor, media waited 4 hours, myself included, to make sure that we got a seat inside. Media lined the first 2 rows there in this smaller courtroom. About 80 folks can sit inside there. We were in the first couple rows, surrounded by 20-something police officers guarding every entrance and waiting for that suspect, who's larger than life, 6'4", very large man, towering over everybody else in the room, standing quite close to the judge as he stood there in handcuffs. He didn't have a tie. He had a blue shirt on. He also had cargo khaki pants. He whispered to his attorney at one point in time. But then there was a moment in time when he went to leave, Vinny, and he looked over at the gallery, looked for the media in particular, stopped, stared at each one of us, and then slowly left the courtroom.
Unbelievable. I mean, we saw some of the photos from him inside the courtroom, and you're not exaggerating in the look in his eyes and the size of this accused killer. So let's talk about the evidence in the case. The prosecutor came out and said this is step one. What are the indications about the amount of evidence that prosecutors have here? This is not an easy case. It's been a 13-year investigation. Hit a lot of bumps early on, obviously, in all this, but what's your take on that part?
Well, they called it a vast trove of evidence that they ushered over, allowing the defense to take a look at. It is just so many documents, including autopsy reports, and then the newer information that we know connected in particular with this particular case, with this particular suspect. They say all roads point to Rex Heuermann in this case, including the search of his house that lasted for weeks at a time. Remember, they dug up his backyard. We still don't know what they found there, or everything that was discovered in his basement there. We also know that they searched his storage units. We know about that DNA evidence that prosecutors say link him to the victims and hairs that were on the victims, including his wife's hair on duct tape. We know about cell phone records and burner phones, and authorities say that the burner phones were used to taunt some of the victims' families. Here's more now from what they had to say today.
You're talking about 13 years worth of investigation. So it is, I'm not going to speak for defense counsel, but suffice to say, it is a massive amount of material.
They say that this is still a very open investigation. And again, as we know, charges are still pending, Vinny.
So let's look at the other side of the coin now, right? So prosecutors there, they come out and speak. Did the defense have anything to say? Did the defense attorney come out and address the public to give their side of the story? Because there's no gag order right now.
Yeah, no gag order, and he is fired up. He says that his client is innocent. He says, I haven't seen all of this mountain of evidence that the prosecutors say, and I don't necessarily believe their case. I haven't seen my eyes on it. So he is now going through all of these documents that were presented to him today. He also spoke with the media right here in front of the courthouse. I was there. Take a listen.
Today we had our first conference on the case. We conferenced with the judge in the back. The district attorney provided us with apparently 8 terabytes of discovery, which we're obviously going to go through with fine detail over the coming months. I understand there's going to be more discovery forthcoming, and we have a new court date of September 27th. That's the next scheduled court date, and that again is going to be a conference date, and we'll update the judge on where we're at. So if I can answer some questions, I'll do my best to do that. Well, he's incarcerated. You know, he's a man who's never been arrested before. He's maintained his innocence from the inception of this case. So he's doing the best he can at this point in time. He's looking forward to having his day in court. I'm not trying this case in the press. This case is a case that we're going to try in a courtroom. The press has convicted my client without seeing a shred of evidence. So he doesn't stand a chance with the press. And we're not going to try the case in the press. I doubt that any one of you for a moment have even contemplated the possibility that they have the wrong guy.
And the defense attorney tells me that he has quite a lot of contact with his estranged wife and children while he's been behind bars over the past couple of weeks. He's also very active in his own defense. You heard right there, he maintains his innocence. And then I asked about if he's suicidal, if there's some scare there for his client. Mr. Brown said that he is on suicide watch, but he is not suicidal.
Interesting talking about the press has convicted him. I mean, the press, we report what each side says, based upon what each side says, right? So the prosecution has said, yeah, DNA, hair, pizza crust, phones, cell phone burn, all of that, which is fair, right? Which is fair. So based on that, I think most people say, okay, that's what the prosecution say they have. Sounds pretty convincing. So what do you have on the defense? Now, if you're not going to try it, like, the only reason that many people believe he's guilty is because we've heard one side of it. And that was their opportunity, if there is another side, to present it to the public, which he has a right not to, obviously. But, I mean, we've seen cases, Matt, right? Like up in Massachusetts, when the defense has something, they're very, very vocal about it when they actually have something.
Right, and you know, he hasn't put forth any other alibi defense. They haven't mentioned any other contradicting evidence from what's been reported, what prosecutors have shared so far. But he's due back in court at the end of the month. Maybe we'll learn more then.
Yeah, we will. So describe for us the scene inside the court. Now, you did a great description of him at the end, staring and looking at everyone. The prosecutor said the victims' families, they don't want to speak publicly. Could you tell if any of them were in the courtroom today? Who else was there?
Yes.
Could you tell who was there?
No, because they were not publicly identified. But when we were all waiting on the 4th floor, almost like a Disneyland type of line, it was super long, almost like gavel-to-gavel. So we are all waiting, and then down the hall walks all of the attorneys with the prosecutor's office, and between them are just two ladies that obviously don't look like prosecutors, and they were family members of two of the victims in this case. They sat up front near the judge, so that means near the witness box, and that's where Rex Heuermann was standing with his attorney, so they were just a couple feet away from him. From what I observed, they seemed very strong. They left the courtroom a couple times, but he wasn't in the room at that time. But it seems like they are really a big part of the information from this prosecution team. They're not ready to speak yet to the media about the case and about their loved ones, but they're definitely here and behind the scenes, a part of it all.
And how would you generally describe the tone of everything today?
It was quite different because, again, this hearing was supposed to happen, I think, around 9 o'clock. It was then moved to 2, and then we were thinking something big's going to happen because prosecutors were saying, we're going to have a press conference after this, you know, we're going to give you some information. So we're thinking, what is that? There was a lot of buzz between the media. Is there going to be another charge revealed in all of this or new information? That didn't happen. So we're in court, and we're all kind of waiting to see what's going to happen. As soon as they call the case, because they called another case first, as soon as they call the case, then they go to a sidebar in which the judge decided to hold in his chambers because of all of the microphones in the room, he said. They were back there for about a half an hour. Rex Heuermann's not in the room yet, and all you hear is just whisper, whisper between all of the media that's there, filling all these rows and typing away with their stories that they think is going to happen. And then Rex walks in the room, Mr. Heuermann, and everyone is absolutely silent. You could have heard a pin drop in that room, and all eyes are fixated on this man that is taller than anybody else in the room. I mean, he towers over everybody. And we were just trying to watch him and see what he was doing.
Fascinating that a lot of times in these big cases like this, judge will clear everything out and just do that case. There's another case before this one. That's amazing. That's New York.
Right.
That's New York.
Yeah.
All right, Matt Johnson, Court TV crime and justice correspondent on Long Island tonight. Great speaking with you. I know we're going to speak again tomorrow as you dig deeper into the story. Thanks so much. When we come back, we're going to talk about the accused killer's family. We have an incredible panel tonight with great insight into this case. All that plus coming up next hour. In Oakland County, Michigan, the Oxford school shooter back in court as the judge hears arguments about why the teenaged mass murderer shouldn't spend the rest of his life in prison and instead should be eligible for parole in just 25 years.
There are no demons. I am the demon. You are the demon. There is a demon in everyone that is the voice. The demon will take over.
These are the cases that captivated the world.
Couldn't keep my life straight.
That demanded our attention.
They were killed by their own children.
That challenged the legal system and ourselves.
How in the world can a mother wait 30 days before reporting her child missing?
These are the trials that became legendary. And now you can relive them all in one place. Court TV Legendary Trials. Go to courttv.com/legendary trials to find out how to watch.
It's been extremely overwhelming for her and her two children. As you can imagine, it attracts, for lack of a better word, fans from all across the spectrum just to get a glimpse of what's going on at the house, what's going on with her, the children. And it's been chaotic, to say the least.
That is the attorney for the wife, soon-to-be ex-wife, she's filed for divorce, of the accused Long Island serial killer. It's been a rough go for her. I want you to take a listen here because they did you see where they're seated there. They're seated on the front porch of the house. That's still the house they live in, but it was a scene that was searched by investigators for obvious reasons, right? Could be a crime scene. So take a listen to Bob Macedonia here again, the attorney for the accused killer's wife, talking about that search and what happened to the house.
She came home to complete destruction of her family residence where she lived and raised the children. Everything in the house was turned upside down. Dresser drawers were emptied out. The bathroom tub, which was a vinyl tub, was actually cut open. The floors are ripped up. The couches and the mattresses have been removed. And just piles and piles of debris that were left in the residence where you barely had a walking space to get into the house. They haven't even had the opportunity to go through all the items the way it's been left, so they're taking the time to do that as we speak. And each day, it's bringing more and more emotion because they're finding items and not finding items, and it's bringing about, you know, emotions from them and memories of living in the house and what it was like prior to all this happening.
And you take a look, these are some photos from inside the home, and you can see, I mean, I don't know what the home looked like before the search. I know afterwards it's a mess, could have been a mess beforehand, but you can see how they cut up and tore things up. They're trying to gather evidence. They're doing an investigation into a serial killing. But this is part of the after effect, and part of this is the impact on his family, right? Which is not as great as the impact on the victims of the family of the victims, but there is absolute impact here. We say that all the time. Let's bring in our guests because we have some great ones tonight. Joining us, the director, co-creator of The Killing Season, Joshua Zeman, back with us. On the phone with us in New York, the attorney representing the family of Shannon Gilbert, John Ray, is with us. In Los Angeles, California, senior reporter for thedailymail.com, the host of Daily Mail Crime on TikTok, and victim advocate for Project Cold Case, Caitlin Becker. And in Las Vegas, Nevada, serial killer expert, criminologist, author of the book Why We Love Serial Killers, Dr. Scott Bond, back with us as well. John Ray, I want to start with you on the phone first. Your reaction to the search and the status of the home where now this family goes back to live in.
Well, it's standard what occurred, it seems to me. But so the threat of a lawsuit against the police is really only has any value at all only if the man is found not guilty. You know, then there can be consequences. But what always happens is you have to weigh the public good versus the private good. And private good loses out when you have a murderer or potential murderer being accused in a case like this. So standard work, standard result, nothing special. Maybe someday, if he wins the case, he'll be able to sue. That's it.
Yeah, and I was wondering how normal that was, and you're in New York, obviously, you know. Caitlin Becker, she's already filed for divorce at this point, and you know, understanding this relationship and a lot of people are still scratching their heads, you know, what is she going through? What was it like? Did she ever suspect anything? Was there anything weird going on in that house? It seems like she's someone who would have a lot of information, but is, I guess, just trying to process everything at this point.
I'm sure processing what's going on is overwhelming, which is what she has said to different reporters and through her attorney and from her own mouth. Asa Ellerup has said that she had no idea that her husband was a suspect in these cases or that her husband was allegedly living this double life. All of this was essentially news to her, according to what she's saying from her perspective. I don't know how necessarily true that is. They were married for 27 years. We also don't know the dynamic of their relationship. She hasn't really gone into what it was like to live in a home with this man for all of this time. But as of now, she said that the children and she are basically crying themselves to sleep every night, trying to put together their home. And, you know, Vinny, I know when those initial photos came out last week of the family returning home, we all kind of sat there scratching our heads thinking, what are they doing sitting on the porch in front of all of these reporters? Now seeing what the residence looks like inside, I can understand why they wouldn't want to be in there. And we know the backyard was quite literally torn up with heavy equipment. So this might have been their only option, that front porch.
Now, here's something else that surprised me. Let's take a listen to Michael Brown. This is the attorney for the accused killer. Take a listen to what he has to say about his client and his client's family.
Do you know if he's had any contact with his family?
Sure, he's had contact with his wife, yes.
In what way?
And family members. I don't think she's visited yet, obviously, because she doesn't want to be ambushed by the press. So she hasn't visited him at the jail yet, no.
Hasn't visited yet. Wow. Wow. Dr. Scott Bond, your thoughts about this contact now? Like, he's accused of being a serial killer. He's accused of engaging with escorts as the victims in all this. She's filed for divorce. Are you shocked that there's contact with the family?
Well, the two words come to my mind when it comes to the wife and family, and that's shock and horror. I can only imagine what they're going through now. Their lives have just been turned upside down. And I truly believe, because I'm very familiar with other cases like Dennis Rader, BTK, where his wife was completely shocked when she found out, that I believe his wife was as well. And she's trying to get her bearings. This is her husband of years. So of course she's going to have contact with him. But from what I understand, there's no legal substance or material substance to their conversations. But she, had lived with this man. He was her partner. Why wouldn't she be in contact with him? This is, to scrutinize this and to pick it apart and perhaps criticize her, I think is just, it's rather insensitive, actually.
Yeah, not criticizing her. What I'm wondering here is she filed for divorce immediately, sending a signal. And now we're understanding that there's this continuing contact, and she's going to perhaps visit. I'm wondering what the nature of all that is and what that conversation is like and whether or not it gets recorded when she's there. Joshua Zeman, I want you to take a look here. There's a young woman, I don't know how young she is at this point, but a woman who's set up a GoFundMe to help the family start a new life. Her name is Melissa Moore, and she wrote, "Hi, I'm Melissa Moore. People may know me as the daughter of the serial killer known as the Happy Face Killer, captured in 1995. My mother and my family were and are victims. We did not know about his double life. I've waited to create this GoFundMe as I didn't want to offer support if she would not want it. I needed Asa's consent. Today I have an opportunity to use my voice to help Asa, who isn't in a place to speak about the terror and horror she and her family are experiencing at this moment. While people may assume Asa has the funds to start a new life, the assumption is just that. We don't know the financial and verbal abuse she may have suffered." What I am seeing and hearing, even from folks in the community, people reaching out and trying to help this family. What are your thoughts about the reaction to this and to the family?
I mean, I think it's actually great that people are trying to help this family rather than typically vilifying this family. He has a special needs adult child, and I think that's really important to consider here in terms of, their privacy and their future. So for me, it's a great thing.
Caitlin Becker, I heard something similar when we had the daughter of the BTK killer on, and she explained that whole phenomena of what it's like to be in those shoes. But as you mentioned, these folks on the front porch, it doesn't seem like they have a lot of money. I don't know if they have other family members, relatives who can help. They're really in a difficult spot in all of this, yet at the same time, we're the closest to this accused killer.
They truly are in a difficult spot. And from what we understand, between the time that the arrest happened and they were executing that search warrant and the time they could come home, the family was sort of bouncing from couch to couch with relatives and even living a night or two in a rental car because all of their possessions were taken as part of this search warrant. So I have to imagine that they're really struggling to put the pieces back together. And from the jump, when we saw this house, I have had a hard time sort of squaring the circle of the fact that Rex Heuermann was a successful architect with a Midtown Manhattan office address, which is prime, expensive real estate, and lived at this home. I mean, like you said, we don't know what it looked like on the inside before, but from the walls, we could see the old wooden paneling. From the part of the floor in the bathroom, they ripped up what looked like linoleum tile back there. And the front of the house is kind of falling apart. It's sort of being held up with bits and pieces. So it doesn't seem like whatever money Rex Heuermann may have had went into the family. Now, this is just speculation based on what I'm seeing on how the family sort of lived from the look of the home, but it doesn't seem like this woman and these children, they are adult children, but still his children, are financially independent in a way that they could really care for themselves. And I likely think they really need this helping hand in order to put the pieces back together.
Absolutely. Our guests are going to stay where they are. When we come back, we're going to talk about the case and the victim that started everything, Shannon Gilbert. What about her case? What does all this mean in relation to figuring out what happened to her? That's next.
There was pounding on the door. Bang, bang, bang.
He said that we'd seen his face and there was no way that he could ever let us go.
I survived because I'm a born fighter.
I Survived. Tonight, 10, 9 Central on Court TV.
State police. Yeah, there's somebody after me. I'm sorry? There's somebody after me. Where are you? There's somebody after me. Okay, where are you? There's somebody after me. Where are you, ma'am? I don't know. No, stop it, please. Stop it, please. Please stop it. Please stop it. No, please stop it. Please stop it. No.
Let me fix that.
Please stop it. No, please stop it, please. Please stop it. Please. No, what are you going to do to me? What are you going to do to me? Stop it.
Please, get him out of here.
These people are plotting to kill me.
So that's Shannon Gilbert. Don't forget, it was the search for her that began this entire case. There she is making a call early morning hours of May 1st, 2010. She's, an escort on Craigslist, got called to someone's house out in Oak Beach. Joseph Brewer is his name. Michael Pack is her driver. Let's take a listen to part 2 of that phone call now.
Shannon.
So Shannon ran down the street on foot from 8 Fairway Drive to 17 Fairway Drive, again in Oak Beach, to Gus Coletti's house. Gus answered the door, spoke to Shannon, then Shannon ran off to another home, and then he called 911. Gus did, to report what he had seen. Take a listen.
Yes, I live at Oak Beach in the association. There's a young girl about 14 years old running around here screaming, and there's some guy trying to follow her.
What's the address there?
I'm at 17 the Fairway.
All right. Do you have a description of the girl or the boy?
Pardon me?
Do you have a description of the girl or the boy?
The girl is about 14 years old, got blonde hair, very small. The boy, I can't tell. He was into like a Suburban.
What color?
Black.
Very small, like the other victims. Let's bring back in our guest. Joshua Zeman is with us. John Ray is by phone. Caitlin Becker, Dr. Scott Bond. John Ray on phone. Let me ask you, you represent the family. Does this arrest, has it moved the case, the investigation of Shannon Gilbert forward? What is the status of that?
I expect that this arrest will move the case forward finally on Shannon Gilbert, for the good reason that now that the police are actually effective once finally with the new leadership, that others can be similarly investigated, the others who are lost, including Shannon. And think about it. We've said from the beginning, I've said from the beginning, the evidence is overwhelming that she was murdered. There's not a scintilla of evidence of any accident or any nonsense that the police mentioned. And so now the same police department that screwed up and didn't bother to investigate T-Rex until recently is the same police department that made the absurd, wrongful conclusion that Shannon Gilbert died of a tragic accident. We need to look back at the facts. I have new evidence on that score, which I'm going to present to the district attorney and the police commissioner, and we're going to push very hard to go forward with the case, because the evidence is indeed overwhelming that she was murdered, not least of which is that she had a fractured hyoid bone with a hole either punched or driven through the middle of it, which is the bone that gets fractured if you're strangled. So, the evidence is just overwhelming. And finally, maybe we'll get some attention.
Some attention to it, right?
Yeah, the police department never, they refused the evidence that I gave them. They refused to take vast amounts of evidence that I had for them. Just refused the evidence.
Joshua Zeman, your thoughts on the case of Shannon Gilbert?
Yeah, Shannon is definitely separate and a tragic situation. I think, yes, it would be great to see a more responsible police department investigate and finally put that case to rest. But let's be clear here. We are talking about two different things. We are not talking about the GB4. We are not talking about the Manorville victims. So I first think we need to deal with the Manorville victims because this is part of that case, the part of the GB4 case, then Shannon. But I think and I hope that all answers will come out.
Dr. Scott Bond, the thing that strikes me is it possible that you've got different killers putting bodies in the same sort of area? Like I don't know what we're looking for here.
Is it possible? Yes, but it would be quite a leap. I suspect that assuming Heuermann is the Long Island serial killer and responsible for at least the Gilgo 4, I think he's probably responsible for some of the others. And I could actually make a case that he's responsible for all 11, including the infant and the Asian male. But in all likelihood, he's not responsible for all 11, but certainly, I believe, more in addition to the Gilgo 4. As far as Shannon Gilbert goes, I mean, it's just a terrible tragedy, another tragedy and an endless line of tragedies in this case. But I hope that the publicity that this brings some closure there as well. And I totally agree with Mr. Ray. I've thought it since the very beginning that Shannon Gilbert was the victim of foul play. Whether it turns out it's the Long Island serial killer or another, I do believe she was murdered.
Yeah, and it comes back, Caitlin Becker, to this. We go back to the beginning of all of this, right? You've got a serial killer investigation and you've got problems with the police chief. And it just has thrown everything off track, and we're so far down the road here. But I gotta think all this attention, the spotlight, everything else, should perhaps yield results if at this point they're even possible.
I mean, Vinny, you know as well as I do that keeping attention on these types of cases does light a fire under law enforcement to really mind their P's and Q's and stick to the book and really investigate things thoroughly. I mean, something that we have not mentioned in regards to not only the Gilgo 4, but Shannon, the other victims who were found along Ocean Parkway, and then even the 4 victims found off the Black Horse Pike in Atlantic City that we just found out today are not connected to the Rex Heuermann case, which were long suspected to be connected. All of these victims, the majority of these victims, were sex workers, and sex workers are routinely ignored by not only the media, but by law enforcement, and they're routinely picked on by perpetrators for that very reason. And that really speaks to a larger issue of protecting these women from predators and trying to give them the justice that they deserve when they are the targets of violence.
And Joshua Zeman, I want to give you the last word tonight. In looking at all the victims on Long Island, you mentioned 2 clusters, right? Manorville, you've got the Gilgo 4. Do you see any connections between those 2 clusters?
I do, basically the location, but I think the biggest clue for me was that when the police revealed Rex's Google searches. In one of those Google searches was the word Asian twink, which was basically he had done a search for porn revolving an Asian man, an effeminate Asian man. That Google search leads me to believe that maybe he is responsible for the victim we know as Asian male, and that means he could be responsible for all 10.